Hi, and welcome to Chapter 4, Mapping the Territory. 7 Traditions in the Field of Communication Theory. So here's where we're going. We're going to briefly discuss the Socio-Psychological Tradition, the Cybernetic Tradition, the Rhetorical Tradition, the Semiotic Tradition, the Socio-Cultural Tradition, the Critical Tradition, the Phenomenological Tradition, and we'll discuss fencing the field of communication theory, as well as the ethical tradition. Craig suggests communication theory is a coherent field when we understand communication as a practical discipline. One of the main things that distinguishes communication from other fields is its utility. Traditions of communication theory offer distinctive alternative vocabularies. The socio-psychological tradition advances communication as interpersonal interaction and influence. Scholars believe communication truths that can be discovered by careful, systematic observation. There are cause and effect relationships. Research in the socio-psychological tradition usually means designing a series of surveys or controlled experiments. For example, a longitudinal study of college friendships, a study that spans a great deal of time of college friendships. The Cybernetic Tradition. This tradition argues that communication is a system of information processing. Cybernetics is the study of information processing, feedback, and control in communication systems. Theorists ask, how can we get the bugs out of this system? Parks studies personal relationships by asking both partners to describe their social networks. He identifies prior contact, range of contact, communication, liking, and support. The rhetorical tradition advances communication as artful address. According to Aristotle's definition, in his seminal text, The Rhetoric, written 2,000 years ago, rhetoric is the faculty of finding the available means of persuasion in a given situation. It's characterized by 6 features. Speech distinguishes humans from other animals. Public address is more effective than decrees. A single speaker attempts to influence an audience. In other words, the tradition is of one-way communication. Oratorical training is the cornerstone of a leader's education. Rhetoric is more art than science, and we can use rhetoric to understand things that science can't explain. Oral public speaking until the 1800s was the province of males. The semiotic tradition argues that communication is the process of sharing meaning through signs. Semiotics is the study of verbal and nonverbal signs that stand for something else. How does the interpretation of signs impact society? Symbols are arbitrary words and nonverbal signs that bear no natural connection with the things they describe. Meaning is learned within a given culture. I. A. Richards railed against the semantic trap he labeled the proper meaning superstition. Most theorists try to explain and reduce misunderstanding created by the use of ambiguous symbols. The socio-cultural tradition argues that communication is the creation and enactment of social reality. Culture is produced and reproduced as people talk. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of linguistic relativity states that the structure of a language shapes what people think and do. Language shapes my perceptions. My perceptions affect my behavior. Therefore, language affects my behavior, how I act and what I do. Persons in conversation co-construct their own social worlds. The critical tradition characterizes communication as a reflective challenge of unjust discourse. Critical theory comes from the German scholars that created what was called the Frankfurt School. It was originally set up to test the ideas of Karl Marx. The critical tradition challenges the control of language to perpetuate power imbalances, the role of the mass media in dulling sensitivity to repression, and the blind reliance on the scientific method and uncritical acceptance of empirical findings. Think about ways that language is used to control and perpetuate power imbalances. Think about ways that the mass media might dull our sensitivity to repression. Consider instances where a blind reliance on the scientific method and uncritical acceptance of empirical findings could lead to troubling outcomes. The critical tradition looks at culture industries, in other words, entertainment businesses that reproduce the dominant ideology of a culture and distract people from recognizing unjust power distribution within a society. The phenomenological tradition advances communication as the experience of self and others through dialogue. Phenomenology is the intentional analysis of everyday experience from the standpoint of a person who is living it. It explores the possibility of understanding experience of self and others. It emphasizes people's perception and interpretation of subjective experience. Rogers argues, neither the Bible nor the prophets, neither Freud nor research, neither the revelations of God nor man can take precedence over my own direct experience. The phenomenological tradition might ask the question, why is it so hard to establish and sustain authentic human relationships? How can this problem be overcome? Fencing the field of communication theory. Traditions have deep roots in the field of communication theory. Hybrids are possible across traditions. Charted traditions might not cover every approach to communication theory. Pragmatism is the applied approach to knowledge, the philosophy that the true understanding of an idea or situation has practical implications for action. The ethical tradition includes principles of ethical communication. Advocate truthfulness, accuracy, honesty, and reason as essential to integrity of communication. Accept responsibility for short-term consequences of our communication and expect the same of others. Strive to understand and respect other communicators before evaluating and responding to messages. And this concludes our discussion of the 7 traditions.